Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Peach Pundit Podcast. Jason Pye, joined by Buzz Brockway and Scott Turner. Guys, how you doing?
Howdy.
It's been so long since I've seen your faces. I was really missing both of you so much.
The lies have already begun a few seconds into the podcast.
I was just going to say, that's a lie.
The president of the Buzz Brockway's Devilish Smile fan club is my mother. So,
some sad news starting off the podcast tonight. About an hour before we hit record, there were tweets and news stories that the Krispy Kreme on Ponce de Leon Avenue has once again, for the second time in 6 months, caught on fire. A few months ago, it was a target of arson. This time around, Atlanta Fire Department has not reported what the cause was, but all we know is it caught on fire.
Shaq promised to rebuild, so we need that. We need Shaq to keep his word.
Yeah, that particular location is owned by Shaq, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my question is, where's LeBron James, and does he have a viable alibi?
Well, one thing is for sure, he's not in the NBA playoffs, and neither are the Atlanta Hawks. Sorry, Buzz.
No, that was sad.
Yeah, but
hey, man, you can't complain. I mean, what an incredible run.
No, I found myself checking the scores, as much as I hate to admit it, just to see how they were doing. I only watched like 2 minutes of a game. Then I realized basketball's just not my thing.
How long have we been recording? We already got
I said basketball's not my thing.
Yeah, but you said, as much as I hate to admit it, we got 4 minutes into this podcast before Jason Pye said the word "I hate" something.
At least I was. Never mind. All right.
No, but about the Hawks before we move on. I watched a couple of the games where Trae Young wasn't there, and boy, I didn't get to watch him. I just don't watch basketball. But I watched it this time because mainly my friend Buzz is all fired up and I wanted to support my friend Buzz as much as the local team. But they just did not seem like they had any type of leadership on the floor without him. So I imagine having him off the floor was a huge minus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So important season with the NBA finals currently going on. Milwaukee Bucks versus the Phoenix Suns. Another important season just recently started up, and that is campaign fundraising reporting, FEC disclosures, as well as I think probably state disclosures too, are being filed currently by candidates. Not a lot to report as far as it goes. We did see one candidate who said he raised $1.4 million. That is Latham Sadler, who is the former Trump White House staffer who is running for United States Senate for the Republican nomination in Georgia. But $1.4 million, that is an impressive haul for a first-time candidate.
Yeah.
I mean, never having run for any office before, right? I mean,
right.
This is
and not a well-known brand, brand name up to now. And as far as we know, I guess we'll see when he actually files the report is how much did he put any of his own money in there, or is that all raised money? So we'll see.
Yeah, and his press release doesn't really give much detail other than just saying 1.4 million in contributions for Q2, noting that he entered the race only 10 weeks ago. Still, obviously, we still have a lot more in terms of other candidates. I think there are 6 declared Republican candidates or 7 declared Republican candidates at this point. So we have a long way to go to see where the other candidates are. Hopefully next week or week after, we'll be able to give a little bit more of a comprehensive update, maybe even have a spreadsheet to share once we get all that information in. But in other congressional races, we checked right before we hit record and didn't see anybody else who had reported anything. And I haven't seen any press releases from other campaigns or congressional candidates who disclosed how much they've raised. Of course, where a lot of us are watching Georgia 10 to see who's going to raise money there and emerge out of that race. But there's just not a lot to say. But what we can say is that Raphael Warnock, Senator Warnock, has a just like crap ton of money sitting in his campaign account. We did like $27.5 million, and that's as of the end of Q1.
Yeah.
So whether he had to pay down some debts from his the race that finished on January 5th, we don't know. We'll know next week or maybe even in a few days. But $27.5 million that is a lot of money that is just sitting in a campaign account, which, whether
Yeah.
that's real or not, we don't know, but he is in cycle. And
Yep.
and he has been, one thing I actually thought about this over the weekend. He's been pretty quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wouldn't you be? I mean, why draw attention? Why create fuel for your opponents? I think it's smart for him to be fairly quiet. He's casting his votes like a Democrat. There's no question about that, but
Sure.
he's not out in front on the steps holding press conference after press conference like some MGT people constantly. And so, yeah, I think it's smart of him, but also that type of money, 27 million cash on hand 3 months ago, is enough money to convince a lot of people that you're something that you aren't. And so as he continues to vote like a Democrat, I expect he will try to appeal to a wider range of Georgians and moderate himself as the reasonable person in the race that you can trust because of his record of not being out there in your face constantly.
And if you can convince the people that you are inevitable, that's a powerful thing to run on. You're the incumbent. You got this money that will depress money to whoever emerges on the Republican side. So yeah, he's sitting pretty right now.
Which is why, I mean, maybe that's one reason why it's been so difficult to find a top tier Republican candidate. And the AJC. I mean, even if Herschel Walker does run, the AJC is not letting anybody forget some of the allegations the things he's admitted to, as well as the allegations, because I had forgotten completely about the allegation from his ex-wife about the. I think he like pointed a gun at her or something at some point in time. I don't remember the details. I don't remember the specifics, but the AJC ran a story on it the other day.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. They mentioned it, and also they mentioned that he doesn't recall the incident. And
that's right.
He has a track record of advocating for mental health issues as a result of his own experiences. That's clearly going to be a campaign issue, whether it's in the Republican primary, and I imagine it would be in the Republican primary. Why wouldn't it be? But also definitely in the general. He's going to have to show that he's okay now, and I hate to even talk about it this way. Right. But Herschel, look, I'm not a fan of him running for Senate, and I made that pretty clear. I want an experienced statesman at the helm in that role. I want somebody who has some experience battling in some contested campaigns to get into that fight with Raphael Warnock. And he just doesn't check that box. But I'm going to defend him when it comes to this because he's been transparent about it. And he's also advocated for mental health solutions for people who are struggling with it. And so I think he can turn it around. I think if he gets a savvy team, like Eric Erickson has mentioned, his team is a really important thing to him.
Yeah.
If he gets a savvy team, they can work that. That was a long time ago, and Herschel's better now because he has a hopeful life and a hopeful message, and he can give hope to others. And I think that's a very powerful thing to run on.
Yeah, I do think it is tough to attack that because he can very easily, as you mentioned, Herschel can very easily turn that around and be a sympathetic figure.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I think, Scott, I think you bring up some really, really great points in terms of like it's going to matter who he surrounds himself with. Mm-hmm. But look, I think we discussed this even some briefly last week. That some of the campaign consultants and look, some of them are friends of mine, and I'm not trying to insult them, but they see dollar signs in their eyes when you have a big name candidate who jumps in. It's either an independently wealthy candidate or a big name candidate who can raise money. So, it's going to depend whether he's a viable candidate or not. It's going to depend entirely on the quality of people who are around. I remember at one point in time, I think it was Alan West when he was a member of Congress, who is now Alan West now a candidate for governor in Texas, running against the incumbent Greg Abbott. But the former Florida congressman running in Texas for governor. And
mused about succession, by the way.
That's right, he did. But like Wes used to raise like this incredible amount of money, and it was coming in all through direct mail. But like his burn rate was just ridiculous. And that was because the cost of direct mail being so expensive and renting mail lists and things like that. You're probably only making a true profit of about 20 cents per what you spend on each mail piece. So, or not profit's the wrong word, but that's your net contribution.
Clearing that much.
Yeah. So it's, color me skeptical that Walker's going to make the right choices when it comes to picking who, because I think the Trump folks are going to come out in force and try to influence him, because I mean, like most of the Trump folks are just grifters, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I think your comment, Buzz, about Latham Sadler and what his burn rate is, I think that's also going to be telling too, because whether he surrounded himself with the same Trump acolytes who are more interested in lining their own pockets and actually electing people who make good policy. Scott?
I just hope, look, if Herschel doesn't get in, and it doesn't look like that's the case, it looks like he's running to me. But if he doesn't get in, I hope he will throw his weight and support, especially fundraising ability, behind a candidate in our primary and get behind somebody, because I think you would have the best of both worlds. Then you would have the celebrity aspect, supporting somebody that could even go out and stump for somebody, would be great. I just don't necessarily know that he's qualified for that particular office, but I do, at any rate, I hope he stays engaged, because I don't think he'll have any problems raising money. But I do hope that if he does decide against it, that he does engage and help our candidate get into the race at a level where they can compete.
Yeah. I think, people often get caught up in the amount of money raised, when what's really important is the amount of cash you have on hand that you can use to run your election and get your message out there. And it's, I was on Marco Rubio's leadership team here in Georgia when he was running for president. We had a meeting with one of Marco's campaign manager, who said, candidates for president never run out of ideas. They run out of money. And that's a key thing when you're running for a big public office like this. Don't run out of money.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You kind of manage it like a business. You have to have a little bit of savvy and understand when to say no.
Yeah.
We're not going to do that. We're not going to invest in that. I remember when I was running for State House, I got hit up for people to buy banners at sports events or sign at a golf tournament. It's like, those things are not very effective. You really gotta focus those dollars on your district, your voters, the people that you're trying to appeal to, in a way that they're going to be able to accept it. If you spend $1,000 sponsoring a golf tournament that only 50 to 100 people are ever going to see, that's a waste of money.
It is.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, speaking of elections, I think we talked about this last week on the podcast, and we were kind of anxiously awaiting the Supreme Court's decision in Brnovich v. DNC, and that decision came down 6-3. The Supreme Court held that the steps Arizona had taken in terms of election reform were consistent with the Constitution, and the I don't know if either one of you had a chance to read the decision. I think I read it last Wednesday, just kind of very briefly. So I don't remember a lot of what it said, but Justice Samuel Alito wrote the opinion. It was, I think a lot of people were saying, well, I think I even quoted a Washington Post article from the brilliant conservative scholar Jen Rubin, who that's sarcasm, folks.
I caught that. Yes.
Who basically said, like, even if the court shot it down, that it wasn't necessarily going to be a problem as it relates to DOJ's lawsuit against Georgia. Reading that opinion, I think Jen Rubin, in her constitutional expertise and knowledge, might have been a little too presumptuous.
You could say that again. I'm going to read what you texted us when you read it. The quote, the money quote.
It really was the money quote.
Even if the plaintiffs had shown a disparate burden caused by HB 2023, in parentheses, a burden on minorities, the state's justifications would suffice to avoid Section 2 liability.
But I don't call it the money quote because I agree with it. I'm just saying that in terms of Georgia and the allegations that are being made at Georgia, if you're a Georgia legislator, you're feeling pretty good. You're feeling pretty good.
Well, what Alito is essentially saying is that election integrity and election security is a compelling state interest in this case, that they are allowed to take steps to ensure, even if it's disparate in its effect on different population groups, that they have a vested interest in, they should mitigate those impacts. But even if they don't, it overweighs the potential impact. He does not, Alito does not concede that the plaintiffs had made their case that it would impact them. He just says, even if it did, the state would have right to make sure their elections were secure.
Yeah.
And that's huge, but how far does that go at this point? So Jen Rubin may say, well, there's an out there, because ultimately the court hasn't decided where that line is, and they need to at this point. And so the DOJ can continue their lawsuit. But I mean, reading the writing on the wall, that lawsuit is dead in the water as a result of this decision and that opinion.
It's really hard to see it moving forward with any sort of success, doesn't it, Buzz?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I mean, there are other aspects of the lawsuit, so I'm sure they'll go forward and I'm sure they'll try to make an argument. But I mean, it sure looks like the judge can, because I suppose it'll be here in the 11th Circuit. The judge can pretty easily say, SCOTUS said you're wrong. That's the end of it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There's a SCOTUS blogs report from July 1st. Alito declined to provide an exhaustive list of what circumstances courts should consider to determine whether a law violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. But he outlined what he described as several important circumstances that, particularly when taken together, strongly suggest that it will be more difficult for plaintiffs to prevail in future cases in arguing that a voting law violates Section 2. So it seems to me that, look, you don't. I think I made it pretty clear on the podcast that I am not a big fan of SB 202. But all things considered, states have a lot of free reign over their elections, and that's not to say that free reign is not. It's not to say that Congress can't come in and step in, because I think a lot of conservatives misread the Constitution's language as it comes to elections. Congress actually has a lot of power over regulation of federal elections. That means they can come in and set regulations on states. Yeah. But given the current makeup of Congress, where you have, I think Democrats have +4 over Republicans in the House, and you have a 50-50 Senate, not to mention the fact, one in which the filibuster still exists, it's really hard to see Congress stepping in and invalidating these laws through any sort of legislative action.
Yeah. And I think, look, the two issues that were at play there were what people call ballot harvesting, somebody giving their or an activist collecting absentee ballot applications and mailing them themselves, as opposed to the individual or a family member mailing it, and then the voting out of your precinct, which I think both of those are key components of Senate Bill 202 here in Georgia. So that will be, at least on those issues, it sounds like it's settled. So
yeah, right. It certainly does seem like it's settled, and it seems like these I mean, I think, how many lawsuits have been filed against SB 202? It's like 6.
At least, yeah. And they were anticipating that once the DOJ filed a lawsuit, that others would follow suit. No pun intended, I suppose. But yeah, I'm not sure if that's happened or not. But there are plenty of lawsuits filed against it, and it sounds like at least these other people who are intending to file lawsuits had the good sense to wait a day for SCOTUS to rule before they file their lawsuit, unlike Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice.
Yeah. All right. So moving along into our next topic here, we have a whip race in the House, the Georgia House Republican Conference Caucus. Yeah. I keep thinking federally. It's the House Republican Conference. So apologies. So it looks like it's going to be Barry Fleming versus Matt Hatchett for the House Republican whip position that has come open. How do you guys see this race breaking down inside the Republican caucus here in Georgia?
Well, I guess we should back up a minute and explain that we reported it on Peach Pundit, but it reported in other news outlets as well, that Trey Kelly, the state representative from Cedartown, the current House Majority Whip, stepped down. There's been some he's kind of caught up, unfortunately, I think unfairly, in a very tragic incident that happened in his hometown that I guess we don't need to rehash that, but folks are familiar with that. And I think the trial is in the not too distant future. And I think he was worried about, the political ramifications of that on the rest of the caucus, which caused him to step aside. But I mean, look, Barry Fleming and Matt Hatchett. Matt Hatchett is the current House Majority Caucus chair, and has been in that position for quite a while now, Scott. I guess several years now.
Yeah,
and Barry Fleming.
Didn't you run for that seat, Buzz?
I did run for that seat. Matt whooped my butt, but yeah,
I didn't bring
it
it
wasn't too bad. It was reasonably close.
Was.
I held my own.
You did. You came very close, and but that just tells you how long ago it was. If you were there and you don't remember, I think it's 2013.
That's right.
Buzz, were you in your second term?
Yeah, in my second term. Yep. So I ran,
and there weren't a lot of
you ambitious son of a gun.
Well, Matt and I came together. We came in together. Matt's a good friend. So is Barry. Good guys. But Matt, I mean, I think this will be interesting to watch, because Barry, I think, well, a couple of things. Barry was the lead person in the House. Speaker Ralston had asked Barry to chair the special committee that dealt with all the election laws. So he dealt with the House version of it and numerous other bills that were introduced, and then helped shepherd through what ended up being the compromise omnibus bill that was Senate Bill 202. So, and of course he's of folks that I serve with, he's one of the smartest, most capable legislators that I've served with. He's right in that top 10 list of folks that I serve with. It's a really smart guy. Both of them would, Whip's different than caucus chair. Whip is the
vote counter.
Yeah, the vote counter, and sometimes brings out the whip, to beat guys like me and Scott, who were off the reservation from time to time. So
I never experienced the crack of the whip from any of the whips I served under, because they kind of knew, they could have a conversation with me and I explained where I was, and then that was it. They never tried to force my hand on anything. And, and Trey and I would go to the well on opposite sides of an issue. Mm-hmm. I won more of those than I lost whenever Trey and I were on the opposite ends, and I was actually in the well advocating against a piece of legislation, for example.
Look, we joke about it.
Right.
It was never. My experience is similar to Scott's.
Yeah, I never had them tell me I had to vote a certain way. They didn't want to know why.
Look, we all got dirty looks sometimes. I received a glare or two over my time in the House from the Speaker, as I didn't vote the way that he might have preferred I voted, but I never, never. The punishment was mild, so
for you. But so Barry had this position before, and we talked about this before we went live, and before we started recording. He had this position under Glenn Richardson when Glenn Richardson was Speaker, and then Barry decided to run for Congress and left the House for a couple of years. And when he didn't get elected, he came back to the House and served as a regular rank and file member, and then ultimately committee chairman, and then most recently as the voting committee's chairman. But before that, for a year he was the House Judiciary Chairman, which is one of the most important chairmen in the House. A lot of legislation goes through that committee. A lot. They meet every single day. So he is articulate. He knows his issues. He doesn't engage in an issue unless he's done his homework. He'll ask questions, a lot of questions, sometimes make it thought provoking. Like, I hadn't thought about that type of questions. Not necessarily in an effort to torpedo a piece of legislation, but to make it better or to fill in holes or unintended consequences. He's brilliant at figuring those things out. But I have nothing good things to say about him, and I have nothing but good things to say about Matt Hatchett. I spent a lot of time in Matt's office. One might consider it, I was complaining to him a lot. He always listened. He always took my meeting, and he always let me sit on his couch and let me chew on his ear, and he always listened, and that is a good quality. So I've got nothing but positive things to say about either one of those two guys.
I'll admit that I've never been a real big Barry Fleming fan, and part of that I think just being connected to the Glenn Richardson regime, still kind of, because I could not stand Glenn Richardson, and I actually prefer Ralston to Richardson. And then, sorry, Scott. Just kidding, Scott. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It was a joke. It was a joke.
I don't know what that was like.
It was a joke.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a joke. And then I get, so with Fleming, he also carried that legislation a couple of years ago. If I recall correctly, he was the one who carried the legislation to ostensibly require 501c4s to disclose their donors.
Mm-hmm.
And that rubbed me the wrong way.
We killed that too.
Yeah.
And that comes back every single year. And the idea behind it is, we don't want dark money in politics. But the reality is, if you don't allow it, the downside is you put a muzzle on the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Free speech is anonymous speech. And
speaking of SCOTUS rulings.
Yeah. And
right.
so every year that thing would come up at the end of the session, usually on sine die at about 10 o'clock. It would be buried in some conference committee report, and they would hope that we weren't reading the bills and that we could be able to get it done.
It was attached to a bill I was carrying one year.
What's that?
It was attached to a bill I was carrying.
What did you, let me, before, actually, because I want to know what you did there, but because I do want to note that the case that you referred to is like SCOTUS also weighed in on that last week. That was the Americans for Prosperity Foundation case that was initially filed against Kamala Harris. But that's a foundation.
Becerra was named in that lawsuit, who's now Health and Human Services Secretary.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the current Attorney General of California, but he or she picked up the case. That's a 501c3, and it relates to Schedule Bs. Now, in the past, IRS has said Schedule Bs serve no real purpose. The Trump administration actually got rid of them, and the IRS said that under Obama. That wasn't Trump's IRS. That was Obama's IRS that said that the Schedule Bs really serve no real purpose. But what we're talking about, that's foundation dollars, C3 dollars. We're talking about C4s, advocacy organizations. And I would hope that, having experienced some measure of cancel culture himself in the past session as it relates to SB 202, that State Representative Fleming has maybe learned a lesson that donor disclosures will be used to cancel donors to 501c4 organizations. And I hope he understands that a little bit more clearly now. Maybe he won't maybe he'll think a little bit more before introducing a piece of legislation like that, because that's the thing that I think conservatives or Republicans who push this don't really understand, that some of the very issues they claim to care about are the ones who are going to be canceled first when it comes to something like that.
Yeah, and look, I have to confess that my views on this have evolved over the years. Yeah, I mentioned something similar to this was attached to a bill that I was carrying. And at that time, there was a group in Georgia called Better Georgia that had popped up. I
remember Better
how it was funded. They were mean and vicious. They'd come after me numerous times.
They would put our friends' names on a billboard and drive around the Capitol saying that they were, evil people. To say
nice. And I'd be interested to see how the Supreme Court would handle this if this were direct political spending. Because I do think there needs to be more leeway. The public, there's a certain measure that the public has a right to know who's attempting to influence the outcome of elections versus these types of foundation dollars and things like that. So
I guess on the C4 side, because a foundation, it has to be 90% education and 10% can be advocacy.
Right.
So like where I work, we have Due Process Institute. We have the Clause 40 Foundation. Clause 40 of Magna Carta is where it gets its name. But we, like, even though we can do 10%, we don't even do that. Like we stay away from the advocacy entirely with the foundation, just so we don't ever run afoul of anything.
Right.
But there are when it comes to 501c4s, it's like 51% has to be advocacy and the rest can be political. So it gets a little tricky when it comes into that. And there were certainly some groups in the past, like American Crossroads, with issue-based ads, things like that, that would really, really like, walk that fine line where it was like, this is almost electioneering. And so like, I get that to a large degree. I get that argument, but at the same time, because like political action committee dollars, PACs, 527s, all that's disclosable. You have to disclose that. But when it comes to 501c4s, it's a little different. Yeah. Well, it's completely different. Yeah. It's just, I would rather err on the side of caution than just, require
specific things within the First Amendment that are protected. Your right to associate, meaning being able to pool your resources, i.e. money.
Yep.
Your right to petition government. And the government cannot regulate those two things, point blank, period, end of discussion. And any attempt to regulate that is exactly a violation of those two rights that are enshrined in the First Amendment. So we have this political system. It's not perfect, right? And sometimes people pool their money for purposes that we don't agree with. But we have to protect Better Georgia's ability to say what they want to say as much as we have that ability. And so I understand why people get up in arms about it, but at the same time, it's political speech. It's political speech.
Two things. First of all, the very founding of this country, the Federalist Papers were all written anonymously.
Right.
It's true.
And so there's that. And then the second side of the equation is this. With freedom comes excess, and that may mean and when it comes to the First Amendment, it's not just speech with which we agree, it's also speech with which we disagree. That's hate. Right. That includes hate speech, which I don't like, and that includes giving dollars to organizations that promote things I may disagree with, or maybe things that attack things I hold dear. I'm a big believer in free markets. And there are certainly in this day and age plenty of both Republicans and Democrats who hate free markets.
Yeah.
So, but your point about being canceled is exactly right. We saw it in California where was it Google executive who got canceled because
Mozilla.
Yeah, got canceled for his political beliefs. Because he was giving money to groups that didn't align with the leftist thought process of the average Californian, and he thought differently, and he wanted to support areas where he thought society should be going, and they ended up canceling him. Yep. And the same thing, you touched about what happened with Barry. You didn't explain the whole story. When Barry Fleming introduced and got SB 202 passed as the face of that piece of legislation, he, the left came after him back home. He was city attorney for,
maybe a town of Harlem.
Harlem was it?
And then a county, one of the counties down there. I'm sorry, right. the name of the county slipping my mind.
And the left came after him, and he ended up losing that business. He lost those positions as city and county attorneys for those local governments because of his protection of this issue, which apparently is now passing constitutional muster. So. So I mean, he knows that it will happen. I don't know how much of a thought process that would have with him now, or impact on his thought process, but we can point to real world examples of where the left goes after people and cancels them for participating in this. And we cannot go down that road. We have to push back and defend the right to speech.
Yeah, it was Hancock County back in March. They asked him to resign, voted unanimously. And the county is 71% African American.
Mm-hmm. I guess to circle back, Jason, to your original question, I think Fleming and Hatchett are two popular, well-liked guys within the caucus, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how this shapes out within the caucus, and if anybody else gets in.
Well, and it also creates a position that'll be open because Hatchett will, at the time of the election, have to vacate his position as chair. And so you will have people running for chairman.
Mm-hmm. Caucus chair. Yep.
Caucus chair. And so, which is not the most glamorous position. You get a nice office in the Capitol. You have to organize the caucus meetings, and you run the caucus meetings to make sure it stays on topic, and you pick which person's going to ask questions during caucus, or and then you have to listen to people like me come and sit on your couch. But it's not a glamorous position, but it is a leadership position. And with it comes a certain amount of influence and pull. And I imagine there are several different individuals. We haven't heard any rumors yet. I haven't heard any rumors about who's going to run for that, because Hatchett just announced yesterday that he was running for whip. So, but it will create a domino effect. You will have people seeking that position. And if one of the other members of leadership decides to run for caucus chair, you're talking about a cascading effect then.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Scott.
Which would only be either Micah Gravely as vice chair or Bruce Williamson, who's the secretary treasurer of the caucus. So if either one of those two, and then you'd have another position open.
In other Georgia political news, well, I guess Georgia General Assembly news, there's I guess an open question about Butch Miller, whether he's going to step down as Senate President pro tem, because since he's running for lieutenant governor. This is pretty intriguing, considering he was one of the people who pushed David Schaefer out when Schaefer decided to seek higher office. So what are we hearing? What are we thinking as it relates to State Senator Miller?
Well, I think the rumors that we're hearing, and Scott can either confirm or deny this, but that Senator Miller does not want to step down, but there is a lot of pressure being brought upon him by the members of the rest of the Senate caucus, because as you mentioned, Jason, what was good for David Schaefer when he announced his run for lieutenant governor, why isn't it good for Butch Miller? So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, and that I heard the same rumor as Buzz. I think Buzz and I were told by the same people today. The caucus is putting pressure on Butch to step down. One of the members of the Senate that I spoke to about this a while back told me that it's only right that he would, and they would also be looking at running potentially for that position. So you have a couple, and also the last thing is Burt Jones hasn't declared what he's doing yet. As senator, he's likely to run for a higher statewide office at a minimum. And LG is one of those races he's rumored to run. So if you have two members of the caucus, one in leadership and one that's a rank and file member, running for the same job, which is essentially to run the Senate, I think the rank and file members are thinking it'd only be fair if both of them were on the same level playing field. And so you have that dynamic at play as well. And then you're going to have the domino effect there as well, because you're going to have members who are currently in a position that they currently have in leadership want to become pro tem. Pro tem in the Senate is not as powerful as, say, the Speaker of the House. It is the highest leadership position that the Senate votes on. The person who runs it obviously is the LG, which is a statewide elected office, but it has a tremendous amount of influence and power. Not quite as much as Speaker, but close. Yeah.
Well, I think that'll be one story worth following. And speaking of stories worth following, she's becoming like Raffensperger. Like, I don't want to talk about her, but she insists upon herself. So apparently Marjorie Taylor Greene,
she's forcing herself into our lives against our will.
Congresswoman QAnon apparently took issue with the White House's comment that they were going to go door to door and ask people to become vaccinated against COVID-19. And she once again made a comparison to Nazis. Now, whether she knew it was a comparison to Nazis or not, I don't know.
It could have been a fashion statement. She just doesn't like brown shirts for whatever reason.
She could have confused it with a UPS driver. I don't know. But when you use the term brown shirts, it's yes, Scott, the UPS wears brown.
The connection you just drew for me, the dots you connected in my mind are amazing. So maybe that's what she meant.
I don't know. But brown shirts has a very specific meaning as it relates to Nazi Germany. It was a paramilitary unit in Nazi Germany that targeted political enemies. And she is once again making a Nazi comparison and political rhetoric, and that's just not cool.
No.
And she knows it's not cool because she apologized for a previous statement.
She literally went to the damn Holocaust Museum and apologized afterwards. It wasn't just that she apologized.
Right.
She went to the Holocaust Museum, which is by far one of the most moving experiences anyone will ever have.
Right. Our friend Sam Teasley tells a story about walking through there and then immediately leaving there with the weight of having to get involved in our culture to prevent something like that from ever happening again.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the more touching stories about why somebody was motivated to get into politics is they went to the Holocaust Museum. You cannot go to the Holocaust Museum and not have an emotional reaction.
No, you can't. And they give you that little card when you go in with like a victim of the Holocaust. It has their name and their information on it. And you have that card at the end of it. Until the end of it, you can keep it. But it tells you like, basically this is the person that you're kind of, I guess, I don't know if it's like representing or whatever the case may be, but like, that's who you're supposed to kind of identify with as you walk through. And it's, so she would have gotten that, at least she should have, as she walked through. And it's like, you shouldn't make comparisons to Nazism in American politics without recognizing the full weight of what you're saying.
Right.
This is a deeper question I have now about Marjorie Taylor Greene is her ability to learn, even from her own mistakes, but her ability to learn it all. Does she have it? Does she have the ability to learn? Mm-hmm. And I think she's demonstrating that she doesn't. And that's a deep, deep concern that everybody should have. I mean, she either went there, had that experience and walked out feeling remorseful, or she faked it. If she faked it, that's really, really terrible. But if she forgot that she had that experience and immediately, and I'm talking days pass, and she does this again, she's showing that she is incapable of learning from her past mistakes, a mistake that she recognized, unless she faked it. Either way, either one of those scenarios is terrible. It's terrible for her. It's terrible for our state and our country. She needs to stop. Just stop trying to grab the spotlight. Every time there's a camera and a microphone, you can walk right by that thing. You don't need to get into that camera. You don't need to say squat. Nobody needs to hear from you right now. Yep. Just calm your butt down, sit in the back, do a job, represent your people. Yeah. Stop with this garbage. Look, we're talking about 6 million people who died, and you're trying to, and I understand that vaccinations can be a very emotional issue, but we're not talking about government-sponsored genocide.
Yeah,
it's not that. Okay.
Look, yeah, exactly.
You can encourage people to not get vaccinated, but you don't have to compare the United States government to freaking Nazis.
No, and this is the thing, because I think make one point here, actually 2 points here. The first one is, so Kevin McCarthy, who is the House Minority Leader, who has done nothing to earn the title of Speaker, but is currently the House Minority Leader, recently unveiled a number of task forces, very Paul Ryan-esque, to address certain issues, or lay out the Republican Party's platform, House Republican Conference's platform. The Future of American Freedoms Task Force, led by the great defender of freedom, Jim Jordan. I'm sorry, I am not a Jordan fan, but
you shut your dirty mouth.
But there are a couple really good names on the list. So you have Barry Loudermilk's on the list, Maria Salazar, who is of Cuban descent and represents part of Miami, which has a very big Cuban population, who know the dangers of socialism. You have Congressman Tom McClintock, who is one of my personal favorites in amongst House Republicans. He is probably one of the few true fiscal conservatives left. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene, who just 2 or 3 weeks ago was saying that AOC needed to be locked up, which is something that actual fascists did.
Right. If you want to, that's a brown shirt.
That's a brown shirt thing.
Yeah.
And part of me feels really sorry for people who live in Georgia House District 14, because you effectively have no representation.
Right.
Yes, she can speak on the floor. Yes, she can introduce legislation. Yes, she can participate in debate, but she's not on any committees, which was a choice of House Democrats to remove her from committees. But I mean, she's caused problems. Like, she's going down there demanding votes on suspension legislation. This is legislation that would ordinarily pass either by voice vote or overwhelming margins on the House floor. And they've gotten around her on that. They're just consolidating them into one big package and letting them pass on block. So like she's essentially not a factor. She's just an annoyance. And there's Thomas Massey, who is one of the nicest people you'll meet in Washington D.C. Principled, just I mean one of the more principled members of the House Republican Conference, who votes the right way. He has occasionally some fire breathing rhetoric. He gets super passionate about things, but at least his constituents have a voice.
Yeah.
She's the anti Thomas Massey.
Yeah. Look, Biden's floating out that idea of going door to door. That's a stupid idea. It's dumb.
Yes.
It's a big freaking waste of money. But what's going to happen? They're going to knock on somebody's door and, hey, we encourage you to get a vaccine. Nobody's going to be arrested. Nobody's going to be publicly shamed and humiliated. Nobody's going to be put on a train and sent off to any place. None of that stuff's going to happen. So it's a yet another stupid analogy that makes it seem like that everything is the end of the world, when it's just more stupid government tricks to try to raise the vaccination rate.
I have a challenge for Congressman Greene. Stop just for a minute, so that we don't have to talk about you until after November. Can you do that for us?
I like it.
Just my challenge to you is to not do anything so stupid that you're a topic on this podcast for the next 4 months.
So speaking of embarrassments from Georgia, I do want to, for those of you who are watching this, I'm going to see if I can do this right. We have a tweet from a former Georgia Congresswoman, Cynthia McKinney, who tweeted this.
Yeah.
For those of you who are listening rather than watching, this is a picture. It's a tweet that says the final piece of the puzzle. And it's a puzzle that has the World Trade Center in the background that is smoldering, but still standing. And the piece, the final piece of the puzzle that's being added is Zionists right above did it. So we have some pretty embarrassing folks who occasionally come from Georgia.
I mean, that's anti-Semitic. It absolutely is anti-Semitic.
Yes, it is.
It's factually wrong, but it's par for the course for Cynthia McKinney. I mean, she was, before there was Marjorie Taylor Greene, there was Cynthia McKinney.
Yep. Marjorie Taylor Greene is Republican Cynthia McKinney.
Yeah.
They're both bad.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's just, oh my gosh, dude. My facial expressions for you folks who are watching, I'm sorry. For those who can't see it, I'm cringing over here.
Yeah. Hard not to.
And look, the dangerous thing about what Cynthia McKinney did, you have Congressman Omar who says similar things, maybe not quite as on the nose. But there is a very troubling rise in anti-Semitism that's gone on for the past few years in this country, and yes, we understand that there's a rise in attacks on Asian folks. There's a rise in attack, but before that, there's been a longstanding rise in crimes against and hate crimes and rise in anti-Semitism against Jewish community. There was a Jewish person in New York just stabbed just the other day in broad daylight. So this is very troubling, and folks like Cynthia McKinney who shoot their mouth off like this don't understand what probably do understand. That's maybe the more troubling part of it. She knows exactly what she's doing and what she's saying, and what this helps bring about, which is more of this kind of anti-Semitic activity.
Yeah. No, it just still amazes me that people, regardless of what race you are or what race the other whether it's a group of people or whatever the case may be, how we still treat people who are different than us as dirt.
Yeah,
it's still amazing. I did a podcast today for my day job with the Pegasus Institute, which is based up in Kentucky. And we talked about very briefly, we just kind of touched on the broader themes of like the lack of critical thinking and the lack of empathy that exists in American society today. And I really think it's going to be our downfall.
Yeah, it's a scary time because there's no, it's pointing the finger at people for, with just lies and outright lies.
Yeah.
We know who was behind 9/11. It wasn't Zionists.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, it's unfair to blame a whole group of people for the actions of a few.
Right.
Which is the danger of what Jason is talking about.
Right.
We know who was behind it. We know their names.
Yeah.
They were individuals. They shared some traits in common, but they were not representative of an entire group of people. And
no.
They might have been part of a group, but they weren't the group.
No, there was a small group, a small, well-funded organization.
Right. And so, it's dangerous for us to especially look back that far and start dividing us up by our culture, our creed. It's just, but it's par for the course with how the left reacts to things. They want us to be divided by these lines. It helps keep them in power because they're the ones who are advocating for you, right? It creates this populist message that seems to be really popular, for lack of a better term. But the reality is we can't be doing that. We are at first a nation that recognizes the value of the individual. And we walk away from that when we begin to accept this from our political leaders. And Cynthia McKinney may no longer be in Congress, but she's still a political leader. She's still, just as much as Buzz and I are, we still talk
bigger
about
followings.
Engaged. We have followings. Yeah. I mean, we have.
He was a candidate for president.
Right. And so people are going to listen to that and say, she's right. And she's not. It's, just, oh my gosh, dude, I'm so cringy over here. I'm just cringed out.
As you should be.
Well, before we go, any final thoughts?
Well, we started with Shaq. We can end with Charles Barkley. And a few weeks ago on Inside the NBA, he went on a little rant about how, in his words, most black people and most white people are really good people and get along just fine. It's politicians and people in leadership who are dividing us. And I think in large measure, he's right. And we see example. We talked about 2 examples of it right here. So
yeah. Prayers for the Krispy Kreme, man. Prayers for the Krispy Kreme. It's just tragic that would be burned twice in a very short period of time. We will recover. We are Atlanta. We are strong. We will recover.
From the ashes rises the phoenix.
The phoenix
rises the hot donut phoenix. Sign now. The hot donuts now sign.
Rise from the ashes.
Yes. That neon will glow again.
That neon hot sign will glow again. Yes, sir. Yes. All right, folks, that's it for us this week. We'll hope to be back next week. If not, we'll be back the week after. And hopefully we'll have some candidate information to discuss, maybe more fundraising numbers coming in. Until next time, have a good rest of your week. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Peace out. And I don't know, go Dogs. Sorry, Buzz.
No. Go Jackets.
Go Owls.
Later, folks.